Hello, my name is Chuck Wolfe. Over the years, I've worked in many different roles, including leading my own leadership consulting company since 1994. I've worked for and with some of the best companies and universities in the world, and have had the opportunity to work with government officials, military organizations, and public and private schools. I'm a leading expert and pioneer in emotional intelligence. Since 2009, I have been a volunteer hosting a radio show I created called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. I really enjoy making a difference in people's lives. The show is on award-winning community radio station, WPKN in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In recent years, Simsbury Community Television has been sharing my shows on their station and on YouTube. My sincere hope is that everyone who watches regularly will learn how to use the emotion roadmap in their own lives by listening to people who call in to get help with challenges at work, home, and in communities. To learn more, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. If you have a comment or question, email me at cjwolfe@cjwolfe.com. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Chuck Wolfe, and you're listening to the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. It's great to be back here with you. This is the second Wednesday of the month, and I am here on the first and second Wednesdays of the month, and I want to thank everybody who's a regular listener for tuning back in. I know it's not always easy to catch me when I'm on the air because it's just a couple of times a month, but I do really appreciate all of those of you who are regular listeners. It seems more recently I've had people who have called in and talked to me about times they've talked with me in the past, and lots of times a lot of the things that I've got a chance to talk with you about have turned out just great, and I'm really thankful for the fact that you provide that feedback. It's always nice for me to know that people who I am dealing with on the phones, who I don't know, haven't met, but often are just really glad to be able to help if I can. And this idea of an emotion roadmap, helping you focus on the emotions that you're feeling, helping you think about what it is that somebody you might be dealing with that's important to whatever it is you're trying to get done is feeling. If I can help you to navigate that, to influence how you're feeling and how other people are feeling in a way that makes for a better, more positive outcome for you, I really enjoy doing that. For those of you that are new to the show again is the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. And we're broadcast here live on WPKN 89.5 FM, the first and second Wednesday of each month from 12 noon to 1 p.m. So glad to be here with you. And if anybody wants to call in right away, had a lot of callers last time I was on the air. I hope that some of the conversations were beneficial to the three people I talked with last week. I know that I was able to help Greg and Red in ways that they seemed like they were very thankful about what I said to them. I also know that I had a caller who wanted to know whether or not to stay with the person she was with. And I hope that I at least offered some insights and some ideas about what you should think about, how you might want to feel should you decide to stay together, or whatever choice you make, what you might need to consider before you make that choice. There was an incident where a person that she'd been together with for a long time had broken her trust in a very meaningful way. And yet there's a history of 4 years of being together that were really positive, it sounded like. And so should I stay or should I go? The answer was really a big question mark. And I couldn't say which way she should turn because I don't know about the other 4 years, but the one incident sounded pretty damaging. So I hope that you were able to be helped at least by helping to clarify some of the points that you were considering. And I wish you well with whatever decision you make. Again, if you have something that you wanted to talk to me about and you're ready to call, the number is 203-336-9756. I want to give the number out right away in case somebody's waiting to call. Because again, I did have a lot of calls last week. And so if you've got something on your mind you want to chat with me about and you're a regular listener and you know what the show's about, feel free to pick up the phone and dial 203-336-9756. I simply will ask you about your name, You don't have to give me your real name if it's more comfortable to use some other name that you'd like to be called for the time we're talking together. I just like having some term I can call you by. And so it doesn't have to be your real name. Sometimes people feel more comfortable giving, just a different name. And that's fine. What I hope that people understand about the show, and again, those of you who are regular listeners know this, but those who might be new to the show, is I've created something called an emotion roadmap, which is designed to help people to get unstuck. A lot of times I find that people are often stuck when they have a conflict they're trying to manage with someone else, or even an internal conflict, something inside themselves where they don't know what choice to make. And it's really not about anybody else. It's about them. So there's times when we feel like our critical thinking skills, our problem-solving abilities seem to leave us for the moment. And often when that happens, it seems that strong emotions are in play, either inside of us or in the people that we're dealing with, or we're concerned that they might be strong emotions in the people we're dealing with. And we worry often about escalating a situation, that we might make the wrong decision and make things worse rather than better. That's around conflicts, but it's also about any kind of decisions or changes in your life. Lots of change happening. There's lots of things that of concern outside of everybody's everyday inner circle of just family members and the concerns that your family has. If you tend to watch the news, it's often pretty disturbing, some of the things that you see on the news stations. And some people are news junkies. One of the cautions I give to people sometimes is, if the news is really getting you down, maybe you shouldn't watch so much of it. I know that sounds simple and it may not even sound like it's helpful, but what I do find is that staying informed, I think, is important. But staying informed 24/7, paying attention to all the social media outlets where you might get your news from, watching certain channels that you might get your news from, reading certain newspapers, news journals of any kind. The whole idea of paying attention to the news, I think, is important to stay informed, but sometimes people overdo it, I think, including myself. At times I've got to caution myself to just cut back a bit in terms of how much time I spend watching the news, because it's often depressing. There's often a lot of things that cause people to pay attention. It's really interesting. One of the people I interviewed a number of years ago, a couple of years back, was a woman named Deborah Tannen, who's an expert, a world-class expert on communications, particularly between men and women. She's a fascinating woman. If you haven't seen the interview, it's on YouTube under Emotion Roadmap with Deborah Tannen. And Tannen was Tannen. By the way, I'd encourage you to read her books if you're interested in the subject. She's a fantastic writer, and just she's funny, she's engaging, and she's so often correct. When you hear the things she talks about, you say, boy, that sounds so right to me. I never quite thought about it the way she presents it, but wow. Anyway, so she wrote a book about the argumentative culture, and she talked about this way back in just the beginning of the year 2000, when the millennium first started. And she said she had written a book about how men and women communicate. And somebody else had written a book that was similar, and she was invited to go on the air to talk about it in one of the morning news shows on one of the major news stations. And she said, "Oh, sure, that'd be delightful." And he said, "Well, I'd like to know why you think your argument is stronger than this other person's argument about the differences that he sees in men and women in the way they communicate." And she said, "Well, I don't know that I see that many differences, and I don't think I have an argument with him. I think we see some things differently based on our research, but I think it's more overlapping than it is competitive. I don't really think of it as competition, and there's nothing I'm really angry about with what this other author has said." And they said, no, we need to know what you're going to argue about. And she said, "Why do you want me to argue?" He said, "Well, because that drives ratings, and that'll get more people to watch. And if we can promote it that way." She said, "I'm sorry, I'm not really interested in promoting it that way. If you'd like me to come on the air and talk about the research I did, and you want to invite this other person and we can talk about some of the differences, that's fine, but I see no reason to argue." He said, "Well, but that's what drives ratings." And she wrote about that, and she wrote about some other things, but that stayed with me because it's so often the case that people are attracted to conflict. What is it that we click on? Things that concern us, that we have strong opinions about. that we disagree with someone else's opinion. What is it we pay attention to? I know that there's often the opportunity for news stations towards the end of their show to put on something delightful, something that's inspirational even, or just something that's fun and kind and good. And it doesn't get the same traction as some of these other things. It seems like we're attracted to angry outbursts and news that's concerning and disconcerting. And anyway, so I encourage you to just be thoughtful and mindful of the time you spend with how you use that time to find out what's going on in the world, even in terms of what's going on in your families. I do think you want to stay connected, but pay attention to the good things happening in your families. When you're raising children or even with your spouse, when they want to tell you about their day, and the day sounds very similar to the day before and the day before that, and you find yourself kind of drifting away, you know what the kindness is in a relationship? It's like, I don't care so much about the details in your day, because the details don't seem to change so much from day to day. But what I deeply care about is you. And so I want to know what mattered to you today. And I don't mind listening to the same stuff. And I don't mind hearing things that I've heard you say before if you happen to repeat yourself on occasion or even often. I just love hearing you speak. I love hearing the tone of your voice. I love you. I love being with you. And I just want to listen. And as I start to drift and my thoughts seem to be focused somewhere else, or you trigger some other kind of thought for me because you say something that makes me think about something in my life, I think, maybe I'll talk about that later, but get back to listening and apologize and say, gee, I just got distracted for a second and I missed that last sentence. You want to tell me again? Now, hopefully you don't have to do it too often, but try to be disciplined about it. Try to really listen to people, not because you're so interested in all the details, but because you're so interested in them as a person. Oh, I hope that's encouraging to you. So today I wanted to talk about a couple of different things about shows I've got coming up. I do on occasion do interviews, and the interviews are often with people I think are really thoughtful people, and they talk about things that I know cause very strong emotions in people, and that people often have difficult times navigating. So one person coming up in a not too distant future is a woman named Karen Kramer. And Karen has written a book on grief, healthy grief. Now, she doesn't just talk about grief when somebody dies. She talks about grief when we've lost something important to us. We can grieve the loss of a job that we might have loved. We can grieve the loss of a client if we have a business where we have regular clients, and one of the clients that we really enjoy working with is no longer a client for a variety of reasons. Maybe they sold their business. Maybe they have a financial hardship and can't afford whatever it was that you were doing for them or selling to them. But sometimes we grieve loss of clients, loss of friendships. It's not always a loss of death, but often, of course, it is loss of death as well. Now, how do you deal with grief in a positive way? But you have to be careful, because she talks even about toxic positivity. And some of what I'm reading is really important, because I'm in an age where a lot of the people that I know have lost their parents, for instance, over a number of years, and now we're losing some friends because we're starting to reach that age where where people die. But we've also lost different things along the way. We've lost opportunities. We've lost friendships. I say we, I'm talking about my family, my wife and I in particular. But we also have friends who have lost children. I think that's perhaps the most painful loss, is when you've lost a child that you've raised and they die before you. Can't think of anything more painful than that. And then, of course, there's the wars that are happening, and there's the loss of life for people that we don't know, but we feel for, and we understand how terrible it is when warfare is happening somewhere in some places, or even just violence within our own country and within certain areas or cities or in our own towns where somebody's been hurt or killed through a violent act. So there's lots of things where grief comes into play. And how do we deal in a healthy way with grief? So I look forward to Karen coming in and talking about that. I also have somebody that I've been starting to do a little bit of work with. We're just beginning a relationship, and this person is a person named Joan Monum, and she is a faculty member, professor at Yale University, and she has some really interesting work that she's doing around caretaking. Again, another really tough subject, because as people age, sometimes you need some special help. Sometimes you are no longer able to live independently of others, and you need people to help take care of you. And while many people don't ever want to be a burden to their family members especially, but to anybody really, sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's necessary. And so what emotionally happens in the caregiving relationship? You think about parents and children, and how parents take care of their children all of their lives until all of a sudden the parent can't take care of their children anymore. And the children grow up and they're hopefully healthy adults and they take care of themselves. And then something really interesting happens, and the parent no longer can take care of themselves and they're dependent on their children. How does that feel? How do you want to feel around that? So I think those are really interesting topics. And I will have Joan on also at a point, but I'm also looking to do some work with her because I think teaching caregivers about the emotion roadmap, well, she and I both think that would be really beneficial. So we're trying to figure out how we might do that. And she's going to think about maybe a grant of some kind where we can collaborate and do some work together. But I'm happy to do that as a volunteer because first of all, I'm getting to an age where it might be necessary for me in the not too distant future. Don't know, hope not, but it's possible. And certainly it's happening to people that I know. So I think these things are not only professionally interesting to me, but they're also personally interesting to me. So again, the show is the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And it's often about something to do in your personal life, but also I like talking to people about their work life and what's going on for them at work and how things might be happening in ways for them that the Emotion Roadmap might somehow be of benefit. So I've helped people around dealing more effectively, managing upward with the people that they report to. Also help them to deal with team members where they may have overlapping responsibilities and they and another team member disagree. How do you deal with that in an emotionally intelligent way? How do you manage others if you're the leader of a group? And one of the very recent things that I talked about on one of my shows is this whole idea of giving a performance review. Another very emotionally challenging situation. So I like to do things with work as well. I've had a lot of different experiences in work life. I've been a therapist at one time, a school counselor, so I've worked in schools. I also have been a leadership consultant and a director of leadership development. I did leadership development internally for Exxon before Exxon merged with Mobil a number of years ago. And I also worked at Harvard Business School. So I've had that experience of working as a research associate in the executive program for management development. And I've worked at Hartford Insurance as the director of leadership development for 10 years. And so I've had a lot of experiences internally, but then I had for the last almost getting closer to 30 years, had my own consulting business where I've worked almost with everybody. Large financial institutions. I've worked with Allianz. I've worked with the Bank of America. I've worked with Fidelity. So very large financial services companies. As I mentioned, I worked for Hartford Insurance. I worked for the Travelers as a consultant, for Aetna as a consultant, for Cigna as a coach. So a lot of those kinds of companies. I've also worked for Marriott and some of the properties like the Opryland property in Nashville, Tennessee, the Gaylord in Orlando, the Sheraton Boston Hotel. So I've worked in big hotels. I've worked a lot also with the military, with the Army, with the Coast Guard, with the Navy. So lots of different experiences. And so I like talking about work too. And in fact, one of the interviews I've got coming up is a couple of people I know at this point professionally and have got to know somewhat as colleagues that I've gotten to know somewhat well. is Dan Goleman, who's very famous for emotional intelligence, for publishing a book in 1995 that really caught everyone's attention. It's called Emotional Intelligence, Why It Might Matter More Than IQ. And Dan and a colleague of his I've gotten to know quite well, Carrie Chernis, who was the former director of psychology at Rutgers University, and he's also the director of the Emotional Intelligence Consortium. The consortium's like a think tank for emotional intelligence professionals, mostly researchers, but they have a few people that have a professional practice, and so I'm one of those few that is lucky enough to be part of that group and gotten to know Carrie. And Dan Goleman was one of the co-directors when it first started out. And I'm going to have Carrie Chernis talking about his new book with Dan called Optimal. If you haven't got, it's a really good read on a lot of the things that are happening in the field of emotional intelligence that are actually taking place inside organizations. And they write about a lot of best practices about teams, how teams can be more effective when they operate with some conditions that lead to emotionally intelligent behavior. They also talk about how organizations in total can adapt and look at emotional and social competencies that they can include in their development of leaders, as well as have culture that is influenced by emotional intelligence, and then how individuals can gain and enhance their emotional intelligence abilities. So I look forward to having Carrie on. He's going to be on with another fellow that I'm friendly with, Rob Emmerling, who is now the current director of this consortium. It's called, if you want to look it up, they have some really good articles and information about emotional intelligence. It's called the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations. And I've been a member for quite a number of years now. In fact, I got to present at a conference. I was one of the speakers at this past conference. They meet twice a year, and this past September they met in Barcelona. So it's my first time in Barcelona, and my wife and I got to go, and we really enjoyed it. And I had a chance to talk about something I'm very excited about that I'm working on that I've talked about a little bit on air. I might talk a little bit more about it today if I don't get calls, but let me give you a chance to talk to me, okay, in case you want to call. Again, the show is the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And you're listening to Chuck Wolfe on WPKN 89.5 FM and listener-supported community radio in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The number to call is 203-336-9756. 203-336-9756. So if you've got something you'd like to talk to me about, again, feel free to call and ask me about anything to do with your personal, your professional life, something in your community that you're concerned about. If you need any help with something that might have some strong emotions involved, what I find is really useful is to help people by focusing on the emotions in play. So the way the show works, if you're new to the show, is if you call in, I ask you to tell me a little bit about your circumstance or your situation. And I say a little bit. I need to know some context in order to be helpful. Some people want to talk a lot about, it started back when I was born. Well, I've only got a 55-minute show, so I can't go back to when you were born. But what I can do is just simply have you tell me, sort of like what in business they might call an executive summary. Give me a one-page description, a couple of paragraphs about what's going on, who's involved, and who might be key to anything that's happening. Now, sometimes if you call, I get callers who just have something that has nothing to do with anybody else. It's just something internal. That's fine too. Because what I do is I ask you, if it's just you, what are you feeling after you tell me what's going on? I say, what are you feeling about this? And is that feeling helpful? And if it's not, chances are it isn't, by the way. If it's not, what might be ideal to feel? That's the concept of a roadmap. How do I help you get from one feeling to the next feeling? How do you do that? An obvious example is to say, if you've ever felt anxious and you needed to feel confident, how do you get from anxious to confident? So I first ask you, what are you feeling? And then I ask, what would be ideal to feel? And then we explore together, how might we get you from feeling anxious to feeling confident? And we explore a number of different things. One of the things I'll ask is, have you ever in your past life, whether recently or a long time ago, been anxious, thought you couldn't become confident, and yet were confident when it mattered? Were you able to turn your anxious feelings into confident feelings in the past at all? And if you were, is there something that we might build on that could help you in this particular circumstance? Even though the situation is different, the feelings were the same. Can we build on something you've done in the past? That's often helpful if there is something that you've had that is a past experience where you were successful. If you haven't, though, we start from scratch and we just say, okay, well, let's just try and figure this out together. And I help you work through that. And then as we think about strategies that might be helpful to get you from the feeling you have to the feeling you want, new options appear magically, it seems at times, that you weren't able to think about on your own when you were just focused on the context without specifically targeting the feelings. By targeting the feelings, I found since 2000, I've been working on this emotion roadmap. I found that by targeting feelings in a certain situation where people are stuck, really smart people can get stuck. Really excellent critical thinkers, really good problem solvers get stuck when strong emotions are in play. And if you're stuck right now with anything going on in your life, and that just triggered for you, actually, he's right. I am feeling somewhat stuck, and I am feeling some strong emotion, and that's partly why I'm stuck. So what I realized over the years of working on this was that by helping people focus on the emotions in play, new options seem to appear. And as we explore options about how we change feelings, the idea of making the situation better seems to just happen as we talk about the feelings that are in play. And then we talk about, okay, so we've talked about several things that might work, but which ones are you really able to do? Is there one at least that you're really able to do and you're willing to do? And if we have something like that at the end of the phone call, you feel really good about it. And everybody else that's listening, I'm hoping, is learning how to use this process. So that's how it works. So let me give you a moment if you want to call. If you got something going on in your family, you got something going on at work, something in your community, something with a group that you belong to, anything that might relate to something to do with a circumstance in your life where it's a challenge that you do have to meet, but you haven't met yet and you're not sure how you're going to do it, give me a call at 203-336-9756. 203-336-9756. So I'm not getting any phone calls. So either the phones aren't working or people just aren't calling in. So when that happens, I do come prepared to talk about things that I think matter, that you might find interesting around being more emotionally intelligent. And I will talk about a couple of things that I referenced earlier. But again, I'll give you one more chance. 203-336-9756. It's funny. Last week I couldn't get off the phone soon enough to pick up the next call. And this week, okay, no callers. Well, let me tell you a little bit about one thing that I was really interested in when reading one of the books that I'm preparing to do an interview for. It's this woman, Karen Kramer. She talks about toxic positivity. Toxic, meaning poisonous positivity. Now, how can positivity be damaging or poisonous or toxic? Well, what she said is, she talks about a case study, and it's really fascinating. She actually talks about a person in the case study. She names the person, she says what happened to her, and she puts the person's name down, and it's somebody I know. I mean, I had no idea I was going to read about somebody I know. I didn't know this story about her, though. This is somebody I know who, as a young girl, experienced her father getting cancer, and everybody around her telling her it was going to be all right. Don't worry, Susan, it's going to be okay. You'll be okay. Your dad's going to be okay. And they kept repeating and repeating and repeating, and she kept repeating in her own head because she thought that's what you're supposed to do. That's what you're supposed to do, is to just believe optimistically that everything's going to be okay. And then he died. And then he died. And she was devastated at one level, but also felt like she somehow needed to still be positive because that's kind of what she was learning as a young child. Well, she wasn't that young, but she was a teenager. And she felt like everybody was giving her this messaging that said, stay positive. You'll figure it out. You'll get past this. It'll be okay. Your dad's gone. It didn't work out. We thought it was going to work out. Didn't. Real sorry about that, but you'll be okay. And you know what? She really wasn't okay for a long time, but nobody allowed her not to be okay. And she didn't grieve until much, much later in her life. And so Karen talks about be careful around positivity. As much as you want to make somebody feel good about what's happening to them, when you know it's not going to be okay, don't pretend like it is. And don't make the person feel like if they're going to be around you and they care about you, that they can't grieve with you. That they have to show a smile and inner strength beyond belief sometimes with you. That's your expectation and you're disappointed if they break down somehow. And of course you're not. We're all trying to be helpful around I shouldn't say we all, but most people are trying to be helpful in a circumstance like this. And yet it's not okay. It's not okay. You know, and it's interesting. And one of the cases she writes about, another really interesting point, I think, is that, you know, when you lose somebody, and you shouldn't have because it's a child, that loss never leaves you. You'll always grieve when you think about this person. You'll always be sad by this. But part of that is keeping that person's memory alive, and that's okay. As opposed to somehow you got to get rid of that feeling. No, you don't. Not if you're going to have healthy grief. Of course, that's a huge loss, and you're going to miss that person, especially around holiday times or around certain family rituals. Of course, you're going to miss them. Over time, you're able to contain that feeling, recognize for what it is. It's a loss, it's a sadness, and you've turned it basically into a positive memory of that person. So what comes to mind when you remember the loss is something that brings a smile to your face about the fact that you had them in your life at all. But the sadness isn't eroded. It's not gone. You realize the sadness is always there. And that's just part of life, and you live with it. It's not a bad thing. It's a healthy way to grieve. At least that's her take on it. I think I support that and believe that myself. Because how do you ever let go of the loss of somebody that you raised and grew up with you? And again, probably the saddest of all the losses, I think. Anyway, so those are some things that I thought were important to say. I'd like to give you a chance to call again, 203-336-9756. Okay, let me talk about something more uplifting, something that raises spirits, because I think people like to tune into the show because I often try to raise people up if I can. So one of the things, and I've talked a little bit about this before, but I'm actually starting to think that I'm going to create a book of some of the conversations I've had with people on the phone. The idea of trying to capture something, when you call in this public information, I guess, but I want to create a book of people's calls with me where I've actually helped them, where people have felt helped, so that other people benefit from it. I mean, yes, I'd like to write a book and make money from writing a book. Of course I would. But that's the main reason for me at this point isn't so much about making money and profit. It's more about the idea of how can I be more helpful? And while I know the show is on air in different places, sometimes people really like having a book. And if I can make it an audio book, then people can listen to it when they're driving around or when they're out walking. They can listen to it if it's a podcast, and I can set it up like that. So I'm thinking of trying to do that, and I have started it with an outline for that. But I also have an initiative that I'm excited about that I've said a little bit about. It's called Emotion Roadmap to Organizational Success, Eros, like the god of love. because the idea is is for people to love where they go to work, for people to love being part of a team that they have at their workplace, for people to love serving their customers in this particular workplace, for the customers to love their interactions with this company, for the customers to say, you know what, I so value you, I will pay you a premium price because you treat me in a way that I hope and wish everyone would treat me. And not just me, it makes me want to treat my customers that way too. So customers, but vendors too, vendors who are often, the last person to be called back by a company. Somebody who has a vendor thinks, well, they have to contact me because I'm buying their stuff. And so I'll treat them, okay, but I'm not going to focus on how they feel. But why not? People don't always realize that when you have a vendor that you treat really well, as opposed to how they experience other buyers and other companies, they'll do whatever they can for you. As somebody like myself in my own business, I'll give you a break. I'll sometimes even do something for free for you because you've treated me so well when you were flush and you had a lot of money and you treated me great. But you don't have something now, but you need my help and I can help you and I have the time. I'm going to give it to you just because I care about you. So you treat vendors, you treat customers, you treat team members in a way that they all feel cared about. I think you should do it because it's the right thing to do. But you know what? It's also profitable. It also generates a really good relationship. It makes life better and more enjoyable on so many different dimensions. Right? So all that is to say, I think if you're treating people in a way that you want to be treated, if you treat people in a way that says, I care about you, and I'm willing to demonstrate I care about you, I'm willing to go out of my way for you, I'm willing to do more than probably anybody else in my situation would do for you. Whether you're my customer, you're my vendor, you're my team member, you're my boss, you're my employee, you're my spouse, you're my child, you're my neighbor. I just want to be that kind of person that cares about others, that really cares about others. So that's the goal. That's the goal of the project. Now, it's interesting because for me, it's about feelings. So it's about emotional intelligence, creating a set of feelings for people that suggests that you want to treat all these different constituencies, if you will, whether they're team members, whether they're, vendors, customers, or people in your community. Don't you like when you read about a company that has done something special for the community you live in, or any community really? You see that a big company has taken a day off and gone out and built a home for veterans, homeless veterans, or they built, or they went in and they redid a shelter for domestic people that have been domestically abused. Oh, I've got a caller. Okay, just a second. Hi, this is Chuck. You're on the air. Who am I talking to, please?
Yeah, hey, Chuck. My name's Eric. How you doing?
Good, Eric. How are you?
Good, thanks. Listening to your show, enjoying what you have to say. A question, though. All this happy talk is great, but if you've got a sociopath at the top of the pyramid, it gets a little tough to keep that happy face going and actually believe that it's making a difference. So can you talk a little, I'm going to hang up, and can you talk a little bit about the all too common scenario where you've got the sociopaths at the very top or at the top tier, and they put on a good face, but they're undermining everything, and so you're implicitly a part of that.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it. Okay, Eric, did you want to hang up, and I'll just talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, thanks for the call, Eric. Appreciate it. So it, but by the way, I don't think it was all happy talk today. I think the things we were talking about weren't so happy, but I get what you're saying, just in terms of this idea of emotion roadmap to organizational success and the idea of calling it about the God of love and et cetera. Well, certainly in the work that I'm doing right now, I've got a leader of a group that is fantastic. It's a woman, and this is a client I've gotten. I don't want to say much more about her at this point, but just know that I'm dealing with somebody who is trying to make this very real for all the right reasons. But yes, I've worked with people that are the kind of person that I think, Eric, you're describing. Sociopath's pretty strong. I think sometimes even with people that you might consider they have sociopathic tendencies, what they would say to you if you were talking to them and you were a friend of theirs is that, hey, look, I'm doing everything I can to survive. I'm doing this for my family. I treat people like that because I think that's the way I need to deal with people in order for me to survive and make sure I'm successful. I don't think that's good enough. I don't think that's a great answer, but I've met people that I've worked with and some that I choose not to work with, by the way, because I think that there are people out there that I just think really are maybe hurt themselves growing up and they just want to hit back and hurt other people. So yeah, there are people out there that are pretty nasty. So let me say a couple things about this. One is, I think that my career early on started when I was a guidance counselor in a school system in Iowa. I grew up in New England, but I took one of my first professional jobs in Iowa, and I got to work with a psychiatrist, and I was doing some therapy with that psychiatrist. I always did a lot of different things at the same time. I had a full-time job. And one of the things that I did was I found out when you do therapy, that most people who come to therapy come for third party because they have third party payments. And what that means is either the government's paying for them because they're that poor, they can't afford it, or their company, they're an executive in a company and the company has those benefits. And so they'll come. And so, sure, I got when poor people came that they were struggling with all the things that cost money. They didn't have money. And so I tried to be helpful to them and understood their circumstance that was based in part on some things that they might have done themselves, but also just some things situationally that happened to them that were unfortunate. But when I dealt with the executives, I thought, man, here's somebody coming in to see me that have a great paying job. They live in a beautiful neighborhood. They drive really fancy cars. Their kids either go to a really good school, public school, or some of them had the kids in private schools. And so why are they showing up in therapy? And then it's really fascinating because I know this now, I didn't then. Most of you have heard about hazing in fraternities where, everybody that comes into a fraternity or sorority has some ritualistic circumstances that they have to get through in order to become a member. And some of those things are just silly and not harmful, and some are pretty harmful, actually. But what's so curious about it is as they go through them, they say, I hate this. I don't even know if I want to stay. But once they get through it, they're proud of themselves. They're welcome to that fraternity. And then they do it to people who are coming in after them with a smile on their face. Well, it turns out that in organizations, a lot of times people are beat up that are up-and-coming executives by people above them. But they are, I don't know if you want to call it hazing, but it's like they're forced to say yes to things that they feel extremely uncomfortable doing in order to keep their jobs. And, at some level, I met people that felt like, I can't make this money and have this kind of status and have these kind of benefits if I leave and go somewhere else. Because part of what I'm so good at is the knowledge I have and the history I have of this company. And so I got to deal with all this crap. And then when they get into positions of power, they do the same thing. So where this sociopathic behavior comes from is sometimes it's indoctrinated inside companies that people just live this way. Now, I think there's been some effort to change some of that. I think the movement on human potential, but I think we kind of went too far maybe by giving away grades and not pushing people to have high standards. I mean, there is a point where you want to be tough on people. And I remember having a coach in high school. I played soccer in high school on the varsity team. And we had a competitive team that always went to the state finals. We didn't always make it to the finals and we didn't always win the championship, but we were always really competitive because this person pushed us to be the best possible versions of ourselves athletically and as team members. as possible. I was in the best physical health I'd ever been in my life. And I felt like I was proud to work that hard, be part of that team. So I'm not saying high standards are wrong, but to purposely humiliate people and to belittle people and make people know, hey, I'm tougher than you. You have to do what I tell you. I'm going to make you do things you're uncomfortable with so you know who's boss. That's really problematic. So how do you change that? What do you do about that? I think there's a couple things that I want to say to Eric, that it's not hopeless if you find yourself in a spot like that, because within certain domains and certain companies and certain countries, if you're talking about a leader of a country, if you're talking about a leader of an organization, of a business, of a nonprofit, whatever it might be, there's pockets where the person in charge of that particular division or that particular team can make life bearable and even positive for those people that work for him or her. It's not always possible, but often a leader at any level can be a tremendous influence on the people that work directly for that person, despite the fact that above that person might be somebody who's deeply troubled psychologically and doing a lot of harmful things. The reason they get to stay, by the way, is sometimes extremely talented. I remember I was asked one time to coach somebody. I was doing some work on Park Avenue, and I was dealing with a lot of Wall Street firms. And I was asked to coach somebody who was extremely high-level producer in the financial service industry. This fellow was making at the time $5 to $10 million a year based on his sales. And he was incredibly smart about investment strategies. And so people that had him for their investment advisor loved the guy. But the guy had his hands all over the women in the office. He was constantly doing things that were totally inappropriate. And they asked me if I would coach him. And I said, coach him to do what? Well, we want him to stop that behavior. Well, I assume you've told him you want him to stop that behavior, right? Right. I'm not sure I can do anything different if somebody just does that, knows it's wrong, and realizes that because he's so talented at another aspect of his job that makes you a ton of money, he feels invulnerable. Why is he going to change? What is it I could possibly say to this person other than, are you kidding? Seriously? You continue to do that and you think that's okay? What's wrong with you? Now, obviously, as a coach, there's sometimes some way that I might be able to get involved with somebody that helps them to see the light. And that's the other thing I'd say about Eric, your call, is that, once in a while you think somebody's a sociopath, the way I think about the roadmap, and if you've listened to the show, you've heard me say this to other people, is there something that this person really needs that he or she isn't getting? And if there is something that he or she needs that they aren't getting, is there some way for you to deliver that to them so they're less needy? Now, why would you do this for a sociopath? And here's the answer, because it's just possible that if they start to feel more secure, if they start to feel more comfortable in their own skin, if they start to feel like whatever it is that frightens them, that scares them, that causes them to be like a bully, they're starting to feel that need being met somehow because of something you did or other people together with you have done. They aren't as nasty. They start to change a bit. Now, I don't say that's easy. It's not. But it's also not impossible. So when I ask people, how are you feeling and how is anybody else feeling, that's key to what you're trying to get done. I know how you're feeling about the person you just described to me. I assume this is somebody real, either in your past life or somebody you're experiencing now. But if it's somebody that you're experiencing now, ask yourself, how do you think he or she or they is feeling? How do you think they'd like to feel and how would you like them to feel? And what is it that you and perhaps others who might feel similar to you would be able and willing to do? Now, there might be some things that you could do that make life very nice for this person, but you might not be willing because there's too much water over the dam, if you will, and you don't care about, you hope this person, I don't want to say horrible things happen to them, but maybe you just want them gone out of your life. And so you don't want to do anything to make them feel right. if it's not that far gone, and there is something you might do to help them to feel the way they need to feel so they're not acting the way that they're acting, it's not impossible to conceive of a strategy that might help with that. Again, not simple. Nothing simple about this, but not impossible. You just kind of follow the roadmap steps. How are they feeling? How would you like them to feel? Do you have any idea why they're feeling the way they do and what may make them feel so much better that they don't have the need to do the things that make you think they're a sociopath? And of any of the things that you think they need to feel, is there any way that you and others might be able to create those feelings inside them so that you get the change that you're seeking? That's how it works. Okay. Anybody else want to go? The number is 203-336-9756. 203-336-9756. Well, I didn't actually intend the show to be about what to do with a sociopath. But I don't think they're unusual out there. There's actually somebody, trying to think of his name, but anyway, there's a fellow who went to work at Yale. His first name is Andrew, but anyway, he was a bully himself at one point in the workplace, and something happened in his life where he felt like emasculated. Something just happened where somebody bullied him, and he got the experience of what he'd been doing to others, and he got religion about this stuff, and he was a very successful, financially successful person, and he went to work with in Yale to create an anti-bullying campaign and try to help people in the workplace prevent bullying and to help people who are bullies to understand what's happening inside of them and to learn what they might do themselves if they were aware of the behavior and wanted to change. So anyway, so this isn't the first time I've heard this concern or experienced it myself. I remember I had somebody in my in one of the organizations I work for internally who fit this description really well. And the reason he was kept around was because he convinced people he was an outstanding strategist and that they needed a really effective strategy because the world that he was living in was extremely competitive. And this guy seemed to have some answers that nobody else had. So even though he had all kinds of behaviors that everybody knew were a problem, they kept him on because they felt like, you know what, he's given us something that nobody else seems to be able to do. I actually don't think he was that smart and that good at this, but other people in higher levels of powerful position did think so, and so they kept him. I personally was glad to leave that organization, to leave him behind. Doesn't always work the way you want. Sometimes you just have to find ways to go find someplace else where, you know, the person that you're going to work for is really, really helpful. One of the people I had on the air one time was a good friend, John Caparella, one of the best leaders I've ever known and worked with. John was on the air with me one time talking about his years growing up as a leader and things that he learned. And he talks about two different leaders he had, one who taught him how to build a wonderful culture of where people felt like they could take risk, where they felt they could trust the organization, they could trust their leaders. And then he also learned a lot from a very toxic person, probably not dissimilar than the one Eric called about. He said, I learned what not to do. I mean, I try to keep in mind that I had learned something very positive, and I also learned what it feels like when somebody's really doing the wrong stuff and what a big turnoff that is and how it causes people to underperform. In fact, even to sabotage at some levels what's going on. So, okay. Well, I'm coming to the close at the end of my program, so I will say a little bit more about this Eros project. The project looks at a variety of groups of people that are impacted by an organization. The organization is a trucking organization and a warehousing organization, and so they come into contact with people that need to have product delivered from one place to another. They have people that need to store their goods in a particular place and make sure that the goods are in the same condition that when they put them in the warehouse that they are when they take them out. And they view it often as somewhat of a commodity business, right? Because it's like, I just need the lowest price, assuming all conditions are met. But it's more than that, isn't it? Don't you want to like the people you do business with? Don't you want to feel good about them? And what if they do things for you? What if they do things in your community that you benefit from, or your community benefits from? What if they just show that they care about you? Doesn't everybody want to do business with someone that cares about? Now, I realize maybe not everybody. Some people just, mow my lawn. I just want it mowed. Come and go and mow my lawn and you'll get a check from me. And I don't want to see you. I don't want to think about you. I just want to get this done. There's people like that too. But what if you spend a few minutes talking to the people that do the work for you around your place? What if you just get to know people a little bit and you show a little bit of concern? And what if you do nice things for them? Just little nice things. What a difference it can make in your world and in theirs. So I want to leave you with that. My show's about to end. I want to thank Eric for the call. I'm Chuck Wolfe. You've been listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. The program is on WPKN 89.5 FM, listener-supported radio. You can listen online at WPKN.org. And I'm on the first and second Wednesdays of each month from 12 to 1 p.m. as part of WPKN's Community Strip. So I want to thank all of you, our regular listeners, for listening. I'll be back in February. I look forward to talking to you then. I'll be back the first and second Wednesdays of each month, sometimes with an interview show, but often with a call-in show. And I hope to be able to take your calls if you want to reach out to me. If anybody wants to write to me by email, you can contact me at cjwolfe@cjwolfe.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the month, and I hope the new year treats you very well. Bye-bye now.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.